The radical, fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody, welcome to Yaron Brook Show. On this Saturday, April 19th, I am back from my Atlanta trip, back home. I think you'll be pleased with the product of my Atlanta trip when it becomes available someday in the future, which is a new course for ARI together with Don Watkins on capitalism on video, available to everybody, I guess for a fee. They're going to charge for it, but we'll see. All right, today we're going to talk about the Supreme Court. We're going to talk about the Supreme Court in the context of what is going on right now, potentially constitutional crisis. But we'll also talk about it in more general terms. Troy, famous Troy from Australia, has sponsored this show to talk about a number of different issues around the Supreme Court. It's pretty broad. Now, we'll see if I get to cover everything that Troy would like me to. If not, we'll just have a second show covering the rest. I definitely want to get to the news items relevant to the Supreme Court, the constitutional crisis or not that we face today. We'll see. So either we cover it all today, or if we don't, we'll cover it in a future show. But we want to delve deep into the functioning, working, and decision-making of the Supreme Court and its importance and relevance for the American system of government, for the future, and for capitalism, for freedom, and the potential for freedom in the future. Now, let's see. So we'll be doing that. We'll be talking a lot about the Supreme Court, about the different justices, who they are, what they are, and so on. And we will broaden the discussion to the particular judges and what my assessment of those judges are. Let me just give the caveat. You know, I like to be objective. And let you know in advance what I know and what I don't know. I am not all capitalized. If I were Trump, right? All capitalized. I am not a scholar of the Supreme Court. I'm not a constitutional expert. I'm nowhere near either one of those. I view this as a layman, somebody who knows some about history, has an opinion about what the system of government of the United States is, knows a lot about maybe economics and about America and so on. But I am not, again, a legal expert. I'm not a lawyer. I've not studied constitutional law. I couldn't cite the most important cases of the past. I just don't know those things. So this is a very much and you should take it as Yaron is not an expert on this. He has opinions that are easy to change if I hear somebody with expertise convince me otherwise. Some of what I'm going to say is based on my reading of people who I respect, who I consider experts in the field, and some of our guests in the past, Steve Simpson and Larry Salzman, and Adam Ossoff, and their assessment of the Supreme Court. I find generally, I'll say this, that our legal scholars, the people who know the law and who are experts in it, have generally quite a bit more, well, not quite a bit, but generally a more favorable view of the Supreme Court, than I do, even though I have generally a favorable view of this court, particularly in comparison to other courts. So, we will talk about that. So, again, you on some issues, I can tell you, I'm an expert, and this is the truth. And in this case, it's based on some the people I respect. One other person I would mention, important that I would mention in this context of somebody I respect and I read, and who actively watches the Supreme Court and popularizes their work, is Ilya Shapiro. There's also Ilya Somin, who I like on some things and don't like on others. He's more of a conservative. Ilya Shapiro, who works for Cato, is excellent on these issues, and I have a huge amount of respect for him. And he helps me shape my opinions about a lot of these legal issues. So if you want to read about this on a regular basis, follow Ilya Shapiro on Twitter, and then you can also get his writings on the Volk Conspiracy blog. The Volk Conspiracy blog. Andrew says Yaron knows all. I mean, there's a certain truth to that, but not a complete truth to that. Whatever the hell what I just said means, nothing. So no, I do not know all, but I do know a lot, more than most. More than most by a long shot. All right, let's. No false modesty on this podcast. Let's jump in. We have seen two fairly extraordinary rulings, at least based on everybody who seems to follow the court's assessment, over the last couple of days. We saw Judge, Wilkinson from the Circuit Court, from the Court of Appeals, write a pretty extraordinary, Judge Wilkinson, a pretty extraordinary opinion with regard to, to the case of the Kilma Abrego Garcia, the Salvadoran migrant who was deported as an error to an El Salvadorian high-security jail, right? Wasn't just deported. That would be, I don't think a big deal would be made of it if he just was through error. But that he was deported to a high-security jail, I think, is important. And then yesterday, or really today, at 1 a.m., pretty extraordinary for the Supreme Court to issue a ruling at 1 a.m. on a Friday, as the case is being discussed by the Fifth Circuit, and the Fifth Circuit has not yet issued an opinion, and the Supreme Court is already jumping in again at 1 a.m. on a Friday. This is very unusual. And it, I think, goes to how seriously the Supreme Court takes this issue. And I think that it suggests that while, as I'll argue, there isn't a constitutional crisis yet, I think the courts realize that we're heading in that direction and we need to do what we can to head it off. And the 1 a.m. ruling by the Supreme Court is definitely an attempt to head off a constitutional crisis. The ruling was by a 7-2 majority, with Alito and Thomas disagreeing, but their dissent, which Alito was supposed to be writing, has not been published yet. So we don't know the reasons for their, although we can estimate or guess, we don't know the reasons for their disagreement. And it'll be interesting to see what those are. So it's a pretty crazy time from, I think, a legal perspective. And notice that all of these cases, or at least these cases so far, although there are going to be others that are going to also pose some constitutional issue, lots of cases are going to pose constitutional issues and could create constitutional crises. These cases all revolve around issues pertaining to immigration. And I think the reason for that is obvious. The reason for that is that immigration it concerns individuals being picked up and shipped out of the country. And in this case, both cases refer to being placed in a high security jail, not in the United States. I don't think these cases would even, I don't think there'd be much to do with these cases if it was in the United States. There'd be ample remedy and ample ways in which to adjudicate these. I think the issue here is that they're being sent to a jail in El Salvador. And also, importantly, that this deportation and imprisonment has all been done in the context of a law the Aliens Enemy Act of 94, I think, that, shall we say, is dubious, and that the courts, while the Fifth Circuit has opined on it, the courts have not definitively made a decision about. So there's ambiguity about the very nature of these deportations, given that they're using a law that is probably inapplicable, and there's a chance, no certainty, but chance, and I think a pretty strong chance, that the court will actually rule the use of this law in this context, that is, the President of the United States using this law to declare an emergency and to use it to deport these illegal immigrants. I think there's a good chance that the court will rule that unconstitutional, that it will rule it basically an inappropriate use of the law. I don't know if they'll rule the law in and of itself unconstitutional. They should. I think it's an unconstitutional law, but it's been around since 17 whatever, right? But certainly, I think they should, whether they will or not, I don't know. I think they will rule its use as it is being used inappropriate in violation of the law itself. 1789. So even in a time of law, I don't think the government should have this kind of extraordinary power. But I'm going to leave that aside. We can talk to constitutional scholars about that. But that this particular case is not a war. We're not in a war. We're not being invaded, in spite of what the Trump administration is telling us. We're not facing an invasion. It is not a war, and therefore you can't use a war act to justify what is going on. I think that's what, at the end, the ruling is going to be. The challenge here is that in the meantime, people's lives are being ruined. In the meantime, people are being incarcerated in high security jail in El Salvador, probably unconstitutionally, and yet all that's being ruled so far has been procedural. All the discussion so far is procedural, right? So that is one of the issues that we're going to face. Okay, we're going to go through what is happening. We're going to go through what is happening in the broader case of this deportations under the Aliens Enemy Act, the AEA, I will call it. And then we'll also talk about what's going on with the Garcia case, both of which are heading to a clash, both of which have real potential to create a constitutional crisis, even if they haven't quite yet. They're on the way there. Yeah, it's going to be the next few weeks, the next few days, potentially the next few weeks are going to be, really interesting. And I think the role of the courts in the future of American system of government is, to some extent, at stake here. So it'll be very interesting to see how the courts rule and whether the Trump administration abides by the court's rulings, because it's not abiding by them. Would be the basis for the constitutional crisis. Constitutional crisis is basically where two branches of government are disagreeing and there's no way to arbitrate the dispute. Okay. Let me see. So let's start with this case that the Supreme Court just ruled on last night. And I have to say, I was really impressed by a Substack post by Steve Vladek, who's a conservative legal thinker. And I got to his Substack from Ilya Somin, and I think he does a nice summary of telling us what exactly is actually happening. So let me just read from his podcast, from his Substack. Just before 1 a.m. Eastern Time last night, very early this morning, the Supreme Court handed down a truly remarkable order in the latest litigation challenging the Trump administration's attempt to use the Alien Enemies Act to summarily remove large numbers of non-citizens to third countries, including El Salvador. And here is what the Supreme Court wrote. It's short, succinct, to the point, 1 a.m. This is 7-2 ruling. There is before the court an application on behalf of a putative class of detainees seeking an injunction against their removal under the Alien Enemies Act. The matter is currently pending before the Fifth Court. We'll get to the Fifth Circuit in a minute. Upon action by the Fifth Circuit, the Solicitor General is invited to file a response to the application before this court as soon as possible. That's the government can respond. The government is directed, and note here how clear the language is, because in past rulings around these immigration disputes, the court has left a lot of wiggle room for the Trump administration and has been a little ambiguous about how severe they viewed this and what exactly they wanted the government to do. Here, it's a lot clearer. It's a lot clearer. This is what they write. The government is directed not to remove any member of the putative class of detainees from the United States until further order of this court. So that's clear. You cannot remove anybody. You can't fly them to El Salvador. It continues, Justice Thomas and Justice Alito dissent from the court's order. Statement from Justice Alito to follow. I still haven't seen it. It still was not published at when we started the show. I will comment on it in a future show when it happens to come out. Okay, so let's go through a little bit of the history of how we got here. Now, be patient with me because we have to go through like the cases. We have to go through some of this is procedural, and like I don't exactly understand what it means, and I'll tell you where I don't understand, but it doesn't really matter to the bigger point, right? So 12 days ago, the court issued an opinion, Trump versus JGG, and it held two things. And this relates again to the deportation of detainees to El Salvador to the high security prison under the AEA. The first decision, there were two decisions that would make it was an opinion with two elements. One was 5-4, where the majority held that challenges to removal under AEA must be brought through habeas petitions. This is, I assume, habeas corpus, which is in the Constitution. Petitions where detainees are being held not through Administrative Procedural Act claims in the D.C. District Court. So this is procedural, how you should file challenges to the removal. We should challenge them. You should challenge it through this particular procedure, not that. I think less important. The second decision was unanimous, 9-0. And it held, and I quote, AEA detainees must receive notice after the date of this order that they are subject to removal under the Act. The notice must be afforded within a reasonable time and in such a manner as will allow them to actually seek habeas relief in the proper venue before such removal occurs. In other words, in an extraordinary, again, another extraordinary ruling that you wouldn't think would be needed in the United States of America, the Supreme Court ruled 9-0 that these detainees had the right to due process. Who would have thunk? What a shock. In other words, if they're going to be deported, the Trump administration must let them know they're going to be deported and give them enough time to file to challenge the deportation. For example, they're being, they're deported as gang members. That's why they're using the AEA, right? The AEA is being used here to define gang members as enemy aliens. alien enemies or something like that, right? And therefore, to be deported in that category, well, they could challenge the fact that they are gang members. If such a procedure had existed before the first batch of non-citizens were shipped over to El Salvador, then maybe you would have had the 10% or more who are not gang members being deported, and maybe Garcia would have not been deported because they'd all have a chance to challenge the deportation. No, this was 9-0, not ambiguous. In spite of what J.D. Vance and Trump are starting to say, well, criminals don't have due process, gang members don't have due process, illegals don't have due process. I mean, the whole point of due process is that people who you're accusing of something have an opportunity to argue that they're not guilty. That's the whole point. If you're not accusing somebody of anything, they don't need due process. And given how shoddily the Trump administration has so far screened these people, how they have the audacity to argue against due process, the J.D. Vance, the Trumps of the world, and the thousands or millions of Trump zombies online have the audacity to argue that people don't have due process is just stunning. It is just stunning. So they have to give enough time and do it in a manner that allows them to seek habeas. Now, they say in a manner that what's interesting is the Trump administration has followed these guidelines so far. And we'll see in very kind of selective ways, only in certain places and so on. So they're clearly testing the limits of this order. They're testing the limits of this decision. We'll get to that. But one of the things that they're doing, for example, is they're letting them know that they're being deported purposefully in English only, so that they need to get it translated, which shrinks the time and so on. Now, arguably, if you're in America, you should know English, so I'm less worried about that. But the Trump administration is clearly doing things to make this as hard as possible on these deportees and to test the Supreme Court as much as they can. Maybe that is why we got a 1 a.m. decision this morning, because the Supreme Court feels like it's being tested and it feels like it needs to assert itself because this is heading towards a clash, and they need to clearly define where they stand. So, this unanimous decision did leave an opening for the Trump administration to play games, which they did. Some of the games just pure legal, and some of them procedural, but play games. All right. Now, right after this decision, which was April 7th, call it JGG, very confusing, litigants successfully achieved a, temporary restraining order, on the government against AEA removals in 3 different district courts: Southern District of New York, the District of Colorado, and the one relevant here to this case, the case we're talking about, the Southern District of Texas, where Judge Fernando Rodriguez, a Trump appointee, barred the government from removing plaintiffs or anyone else. He barred them from removing them from the El Valle Detention Center, which is in the Southern District of Texas, which is his responsibility and in which the case was brought to his court. And this is where it gets, Trump administration. They're going to try to find ways around these things. According to media reports, starting on Thursday, a number of non-citizens being held at the facility in Anson, Texas. This is the northern district of Texas, so outside of Judge Rodriguez's jurisdiction, were given notices of their imminent removal under the AEA. They were given them in English only, and no guidelines on how they could challenge their removal in advance. Now, you know, you could quibble, but this seems to be in contravention of the Supreme Court's ruling in JGG, which says they should be, you know, what did it say exactly? That they should have an opportunity to appeal this. The notice must be afforded within a reasonable time in such a manner as will allow them to actually seek habeas relief in a proper venue. This didn't give them the time, and it didn't give them any of the tools to actually seek relief. It also raised the question of whether the government was moving detainees from the southern part of Texas, where all deportations were barred, to now a different facility where it was on a different jurisdiction, and now they could pretend that they weren't barred. So it could very well be that they were moving the same people from southern Texas to northern Texas. Again, Trump administration playing games, challenging the courts. So the ACLU filed an habeas petition in the northern district of Texas on behalf of the people who were going to be deported, in behalf of the plaintiffs, as a class, as a putative class, all the detainees in a Blue Bonnet facility, right? And this is captioned as AARP versus Trump, right? Now, the local judge had already denied the ACLU's initial motion for a temporary restraining order based on the fact that government representatives said that they were not in any imminent threat of removal. But we're still thinking about it. But once the news of the potential imminent removals leaked out, the ACLU did two things at once. It asked for renewed emergency relief from Judge Hendricks in the local court in northern Texas, and it went to Judge Boasberg, who is the judge in the original JGG case, because that was a nationwide class, and that had they wanted a restraining order nationwide from him. Now, while it waited for both these district judges to rule, it also sought emergency relief from both the Fifth Circuit and the Supreme Court. Now, on Friday evening, Judge Boasberg declined to issue the restraining order, concluding from the bench that he couldn't do so in light of the Supreme Court's ruling in his case. Right? Meanwhile, Judge Hendricks issued a brief opinion noting that although he'd been trying to move quickly on the ACLU's renewed emergency motion, the fact that they had taken it to the Fifth Court and to the Supreme Court deprived him of jurisdiction. So he was like, I can't rule on this. It's in the hands of the appellate court and the Supreme Court. So there it was, stuck. The Fifth hadn't ruled, and here's where the Supreme Court jumped in. It basically decided at 1 a.m. this morning that the risk of the Trump administration ignoring its previous demand or playing games with its previous rulings, distorting the meaning of its previous ruling, was too large. It ruled at 1 a.m. this morning, clearly, unequivocally, the government is directed not to remove any member of putative class of detainees from the United States until further order of this court. So they made the ruling. And then they said the government can respond after the Fifth Circuit responds. Now, the Fifth Circuit, a couple of hours later, basically came out and said, we can't respond because this is really a district. This is where, you know, all the legalese stuff gets complicated. This is really a decision to be made by the district courts. We're an appellate court. You can appeal to us once the district court has made a decision. You can't come to us before they've made a decision. Right? So now, as of now, nobody, at least from the Blue Bonnet facility in North Texas, can be deported to El Salvador. Nobody, until the government argues in front of the Supreme Court, until the Supreme Court makes a decision, actually decides. Now, this is so ridiculous. And I mean, it's ridiculous because it's all this convoluted stuff is because the Trump administration is trying to find ways around. Now, it could be that the Trump administration now goes to another part of the country and tries to deport people from there. I think that would cause the courts to really get pissed off at Trump. So maybe they won't do it in the short run. We'll see. All right. Again, this is extraordinary. This does not happen typically, that the Supreme Court acts in this way and acts as in an emergency fashion, in a way, in a sense. But this is where we are. And really, we're at this place for one significant reason. And that is that so far, nobody has actually ruled on the merits, on the actual issue at play. That is, the first thing, I mean, what they're ruling right now is about due process. Very important, great, good for the courts for dealing with this. But the most substantive issue that is before the courts and needs to be ruled on really as soon as possible, because once that is ruled, you can talk about all the other issues and maybe the whole issue goes away, is can Trump use the Aliens Enemies Act in this way? Is it legit to use it in this way? Now, note that the administration is already setting up another potential constitutional crisis, although no constitutional crisis has actually happened yet, but they're setting it up for that by saying this is a foreign policy decision. The court has no say in foreign policy decisions. I think the Supreme Court is going to disagree with that, clearly. It's about the application of law, which the Supreme Court has every authority to intervene in. That's what needs to happen here. And it would be great if the Supreme Court took this opportunity, when the government is filing another motion in front of it, to actually make a decision about the applicability of the Aliens Enemies Act. Now, it could be that they say, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to leave it to the lower courts to decide, and it can be appealed to us, and ultimately we'll make that decision months in the future. They could do that and at the same time say, in the meantime, while this is going through the process, while this is all being appealed, while the decision about the applicability of this law, in this case, is being determined, you can't deport anybody. That is, they could put a restraining order on a national scale, universal restraining order, where people cannot be deported under this act until this act is found legitimate by a court or not found illegitimate. I mean, the courts don't actually state a law is legitimate. All they can do is say it contradicts the Constitution, or you're using the law in a way that contradicts the purpose of the law. So they rule on the negative. So they could do that, I think. But it's, at the end of the day, at some point down the road, they're going to have to make decisions about the Alien Enemies Act. And given the disregard of the Trump administration for due process, given the disregard of the Trump administration for correcting its own errors, and given the just horrific act that they're taking, that is deporting people, not just deporting them out of the country, which is they could do under other acts, right? They don't need the Alien Enemies Act to deport gang members back to the countries from which they came. They don't need that act in order to deport illegal immigrants. Illegal immigrants are deported all the time. Biden, deported the Biden administration close to 250,000 illegal immigrants every year. So the Trump administration could deport them. That's not what they want. They want to deport them to this jail or to these jails in El Salvador. They want to deport them in a particular way and to a place or a location that penalizes them in a way that I don't think they can do under general, regular immigration law. That's why they need to use this act to expedite it and to penalize them by sending them to this jail. So we're going to watch this. It's going to be interesting. The Supreme Court can rule that the use of this act is inappropriate. And it can ultimately, whether it will rule now or ultimately rule, and therefore force the Trump administration to revert back to regular immigration law, regular deportation proceedings, which can still be expedited. I mean, Obama deported a lot of people every single year. I mean, actually much larger numbers than even Trump did in his first term. And part of this is that, anyway, I think it's easier to deport people at the border than it is once they're in the country, once they're rounded up. It's slower. The process is slower. And all of this, basically what Trump wants to do and basically what MAGA wants. I don't think Trump cares that much about this issue, but this is a red meat for MAGA. What they want to do is deport as many people as quickly as possible at the lowest, just as quickly as possible. They don't care. And if some illegal immigrants get pushed out who are not really gang members, they don't really care. As MAGA, people on MAGA on Twitter will tell you, they're criminals already because they're illegal immigrants. That is, their view of humanity, their view of people, their view of immigrants, particularly those who are considered illegal, is so low, is so disgusting, it's so subhuman. I mean, what MAGA has done and what Trump has facilitated for 10 years now is a complete dehumanization of so-called illegal immigrants. And therefore, you could do anything to them. I mean, I remember, and I remember people who called themselves objectivists saying, yeah, put machine guns on the border and just mow them down. Mow them down. So Trump is trying to do whatever he can to get to deport as many people as possible and as quickly as possible. And so, one low-hanging fruit that he's got is F1 visas. So they're going after, these are foreign student visas. They're going after foreign students. You got a speeding ticket. You got a speeding ticket. You're a foreign student. That means you broke the law. That means we can revoke your visa and we can kick you out. They're using any means possible to get their numbers up. And a big part of getting the numbers up is impressing the MAGA base. So again, we don't yet have a constitutional crisis. That is, the Trump administration has not yet said, we are going to disregard the courts. We don't care what the Supreme Court rules. We're going to act in spite of that, right? With regard to the deporting people to El Salvadorian jails, they haven't said that yet. The Supreme Court, though, is getting involved in a way that suggests that they're worried about ambiguities that they've left that allow the Trump administration not to say that and violate the spirit of what they're saying. So I think from now on, they're going to be more clear-cut about their decisions so there are no ambiguities and the Trump administration cannot hide behind those ambiguities. Although we will see. It's yet to be seen what the Supreme Court will ultimately rule. Now, I think the same thing is true here with regard to the Kilmog Abrego Garcia case. The reality is that the 9-0 decision that the Supreme Court made a week ago, whenever it was, to facilitate his return, for this administration, I think for any other administration it would have been a problem, but for this administration, was too ambiguous. What does facilitate mean? Does that mean we just make it possible for him to enter the country if El Salvador send him here? Does it mean we have to invade El Salvador? That's what J.D. Vance is saying. You guys want us to invade El Salvador. Nobody, of course, is saying that. Maybe stop paying the El Salvadorian government to have him in their jail. That would be a step in the right direction. But anyway, remember, El Salvador is imprisoning Abrego Garcia at the behest of the U.S. And I think it's fair to say that if the administration wanted him released, they could easily get it by just demanding El Salvador release him. The administration is clearly acting in good faith, but it's absolutely the case that the Supreme Court and the District Court have so far given them wiggle room. They've given them the freedom to select the means by which they will undertake to ensure Garcia's return. Now, the administration is abusing that freedom to do nothing. But so far, now we'll see, but so far it hasn't got to the point where the Supreme Court is basically saying, we're not doing anything. Where Trump administration has said, we're not doing anything, we don't care what the Supreme Court rules, we are ignoring the Supreme Court. Right? Now, we've got a case now where, a federal judge, it says, has found, he wrote a 40-something page opinion, where he finds that the government, that the Trump administration, is in contempt. And of course, now there's the whole issue of will the Justice Department find these people in contempt? Now, the judge is still giving the government some wiggle room to get out of this, but he's indicating, evidence indicates, he says, that the government is willfully disobeying his order to, with regard to Venezuela, the gang members and the gang prisoners. So everything is converging towards a point in which Trump will have to decide, does he go all out on this? Does he declare war on the courts? Does he push the country into constitutional crisis? Does he force the court's hand? I think we'll know pretty quickly, because I think these cases are coming to a head pretty quickly. But clearly what this administration is exuding is a disrespect of the courts, clearly a disrespect of due process, an attitude that basically says, it's the President of the United States, we can do what we want. We know that this has been their response because on other issues, they have even talked about impeaching judges that temporary restraining orders on their actions. So we know that they are taking the position of, we are going to fight the courts at every corner. We're going to try to disregard the courts. Will they be willing to go all the way and say to a Supreme Court ruling, no, we're not going to do that? That is the constitutional crisis that's out there. That is the constitutional crisis that could happen. And I don't know how that gets resolved. It's not clear how that gets resolved. What punitive action can the courts take against the administration when the administration says, we are not going to pay any attention to what you say? Clearly, Congress is completely, as I told you, I think last show, senators are just afraid of Trump. They're just shaking in their boots. So Congress is not going to stand up for Trump. Congress is not going to stand up for the rule of law. If they would have impeached Trump 4 years ago. I don't know where we go. I mean, basically, if Trump says to hell with the courts, I don't know what happens at that point. We're in, to a large extent, uncharted waters, at least for modern America. We'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. We'll see what the people, what the American people do, what they decide. Maybe Michael will get his wish for 5,000 objectors to go to Washington. Maybe 5 million people will go to Washington to protest. Maybe this will rouse up the American people against this administration to fight for basically the rule of law, to fight for the American Constitution, to fight for separation of powers, to fight for the authority and the power of the Supreme Court, that it has some. So it's going to be interesting, and it's going to be fascinating to see how this develops. And there's no question, these are scary times. These are scary times. Because I don't know how you recover from a constitutional crisis. I don't know what happens. I don't know where you go from there. And if the constitutional crisis is about this, what about a constitutional crisis about Trump running a third time, or any other ways in which they could violate the Constitution in even more significant ways, like deporting or extraditing U.S. citizens to an El Salvadorian jail, which I think right now would be deemed unconstitutional. But if they don't care, who's going to stop them? Who is going to stop them? So the next few weeks could be pivotal weeks in the battle for liberty in this country. It could be pivotal weeks about whether we stand up against authoritarianism or not. I think, I mean, if I had a bet on an outcome, I'm going to bet that Trump folds. I would bet that Trump doesn't want this to be the issue. That Trump has too many other things he's trying to do, and that you'll find a way to fold without really folding, and he'll accuse the courts of being whatever, and he'll argue with them and all of that, but that he won't actually bring us to the precipice, because I think he still wants that legitimacy, and I think he's afraid, and I think that people within administration, not everybody, some people don't give a damn about what the courts say. Some people in the administration, like Miller, don't care one way or the other. But there are plenty of people, probably even in this administration, even now, who just don't want to bring this country to the point of we're ignoring the Supreme Court. Maybe even some of his financial backers, maybe even some of the tech bros will pull him back from the precipice. So if I had a bet, Trump retreats. Trump retreats on these issues. And he can get his deportations in other ways, right? But he doesn't push this all the way. Note, too, that there are a number of other constitutional questions that are going to come before the court that relate to Trump's actions in the first 3 months of his administration. Let me give you just a few of those. We've got the issue of impounding. The issue is, if Congress allocates a certain amount of money to a certain agency to be spent in a certain way, can the executive, can the president actually decide not to spend it? Can he, in some ways, overrule Congress by saying, yeah, I know you allocated money to this. I think it's wasteful. I'm not going to spend the money. And I don't think that's a clear-cut constitutional case. I think there are the constitutional scholars on both sides of this arguing it. It'll be interesting to see how the court rules on this. We've got, we've got judges like Gorsuch, who are very concerned about the growth of the administrative state. Does that mean that he wants to give the president more power so he can, if that power is used to shrink the administrative state? Maybe. But then is he going to be concerned that by giving the executive that power, it'll be used for things that he might not like? So impounding is a big issue. It has ramifications for presidents in the future. It has ramifications for a Democratic president when he comes around. It's going to be interesting to see what the Supreme Court rules on that. Then, of course, there is the issue of tariffs. As we talked about, there are at least 2, and there are going to be more. I know I've talked to some people who are filing another lawsuit. There's going to be more lawsuits on tariffs, on the issue of separation of powers, on does the president have the authority, again, to declare an emergency and therefore to just use tariffs without any input from Congress, i.e. to raise taxes dramatically on the American people without any input from Congress. One would think that that violates the Constitution. The Constitution is pretty clear that the power to tax is a congressional power, not a presidential power. And Trump is using, again, a kind of an emergency act which applies to war and emergencies that does not give him the power explicitly to impose tariffs. That's his interpretation. It's a very, he's on very shaky grounds, I think, there legally. And there, again, there are a number of lawsuits, including a lawsuit from the state of California, that is arguing against the power of the president to impose tariffs unilaterally. That one, you know where I stand on that one. I really, really, really hope that they rule what Trump is doing unconstitutional. I think it clearly is. There is no way the U.S. economy, the global economy, but set aside the economy, there's no way American consumers and American producers, primarily producers, should be at the mercy of the whim of a single individual, even if that's the president. This is exactly why we have a system of separation of powers. It's exactly why we have the power of taxation placed in Congress. It takes time, it's messy, it's difficult. It goes through committees, there are hearings. That's the way it should be. It should be hard to raise taxes. It cannot be that a president could say, oh, we're taxing you. Oh, no, I changed my mind. We're not taxing you now. We'll only tax them, and we'll tax them a little bit. No, actually, I changed my mind. We'll tax them more. That is clearly insane. Clearly insane. So I'm very hopeful. Okay, we've got the use of the AEA we talked about. We've got birthright citizenship, which the court has agreed to hear the case already, so that's going to go to the Supreme Court. I think the Constitution is pretty clear on birthright citizenship, but there are lots of people who argue otherwise. So it is going to be interesting to see what they come down on. I think the Supreme Court is going to have to make some decisions, rule on some issues regarding free speech. I think what Trump is doing to companies like CBS, the threat to repeal licenses of a media that he doesn't like, the throwing out of people from presidential press conferences and not including certain media outlets because they're critical of Trump. All of that, I think, ultimately will go to the Supreme Court, and it's going to be a major free speech decision. So we're getting major decisions here. There's also going to be a decision about executive power, particularly with regard to hiring and firing civil servants. To what extent does the executive have power to do that? And is it limited in any way by federal law? And then there's going to be a bunch of cases, I think some of them are already on the docket, that have to do with weakening administrative agencies. Weakening administrative agencies, all these alphabet soup regulatory agencies. So the court is going to be very busy. It's, I think, going to have an opportunity to have some major decisions that have repercussions for many years, decades to come on some pretty essential things. They will also have, I think, they will be the only potential stop to some of the more egregious things that the Trump administration is doing. this administration, given who's in it, will basically do whatever the hell they want and basically challenge you to sue them. And then when you sue them, they'll say, you have no jurisdiction, or they'll say, this is within the power of the president, the courts have no business in this, and then they'll appeal. It'll go to the Supreme Court, and then the question will, once the court decides, will they abide by the decision? So the courts are going to have lots of opportunities, to make crucial decisions that relate to the power of the executive branch, which could have massive implications as to the future of America. In other words, as to how fast, how quickly we descend into authoritarianism. I mean, it is possible. It is possible that, Trump ignores the courts and we descend into authoritarianism fast. It's also possible that the courts side with the Trump administration and everything, and we descend into authoritarianism that way. I think the court is going to stand up to Trump. I agree with some of the legal scholars I've talked to who think this court is pretty good on issues of separation of powers, on issues of the administrative state. Now, some of them want the executive to have more power, but not in the kind of abusive way I think Trump does. So let's go through the Supreme Court justices quickly just to get a sense of who they are and where they stand on some of these issues. Again, I'm not a super expert on this, and it'll be interesting to see where we land up on this, what actually happens. All right, let's look at the current members, and we'll just go by the order they're listed on the SupremeCourt.gov website. We'll start with Chief Justice Roberts. Chief Justice Roberts is somebody who is responsible, I think, for navigating the court, for preserving its legitimacy, for, making sure. And I think he's the guy responsible for the 1 a.m. decision. He's the guy responsible for these emergency kind of decisions. He is trying to assert the court's role in a lot of these issues. He takes it upon himself, kind of the future of the court. It's on him. He's the Chief Justice. He makes these kind of calls. I think Roberts generally is a judge that is quite concerned with separation of powers. I think he's quite concerned with an overly aggressive executive, an overly powerful executive. I think he's concerned with, and we saw this in a statement he made early on when Republicans were going to impeach a bunch of judges or threatening to impeach them, when he came out and said, stop. He is really concerned with the credibility of the courts and taking the courts seriously and the role of the courts. He does not want a constitutional crisis, and certainly will stand by the Constitution on issues of separation of power. And I think he's quite good on those. On other things, it kind of depends. He's not a radical. He's not going to go particularly out there. But I think he will probably join other judges in trying to shrink the regulatory state, in trying to challenge the administrative agencies. It'll be interesting to see what he does with birthright citizenship. It'll be interesting to see how he deals with some of these immigration issues and emergency powers that the president has taken. And of course, I don't know how he rules on free speech. I think he's going to rule well on most of the issues, but hard to tell. Thomas is really, really mixed. I think, in the past, Thomas has been quite good on a lot of kind of, let's say, call them economic issues and civil rights issues, on individual rights issues. But I get a sense that with age, he has become more and more friendly to MAGA and to Trump, and more inclined to support Trump, although there have been a number of rulings that have been 9-0 that Trump was not happy with Although, again, this morning's ruling was 7-2 with Thomas opposing. Thomas is a standing conservative, which today means a kind of a MAGA conservative. I think he is going to lean towards a strong executive, a much stronger executive than maybe some of the other Supreme Court justices are going to lean. He is going to want weaker administrative agencies, but strong presidency. I don't think he's going to be good, particularly in free speech, but we'll see. He might not be good in birthright citizenship because I think of affinity to Trump and MAGA. It's going to be interesting to see how he rules on these emergency acts. Good for him for being clear-cut about due process. He's clearly for due process. That's good. But on some of these other issues, he might be a lot more willing to accept what Trump says. I think much of that is true of Alito. Alito's not as good as Thomas when Thomas is good. Thomas has had some good rulings, particularly on shrinking the power of the state over individual life in certain realms, particularly in the economic realm. Alito is much more of a standing conservative, not as interesting, and captured, I think, to a large extent by Trump and MAGA and so on. So I think you'll see from him much more reluctance to rule against the Trump administration, to rule against. And I think he, with Thomas, are going to be strong supporters of a powerful, executive. Sonia Sotomayor is one of the left-leaning judges on the court. I think, by the way, political affiliation, does represent something about how they rule on certain issues. I don't think I don't think it determines everything, and we've seen a lot of 5-4 decisions. We've seen decisions where one of the leftist judges votes with the conservatives, or a couple of conservatives voting with the leftist judges. We've seen all kinds of mix and matches here. The court does not rule strictly on a party affiliation basis, or at least hasn't in the past. Now, Trump is a new challenge, and we'll see with Trump and the Trump administration rulings how the court rules and to what extent there's this. But I know less about the kind of the good things about the more left-wing judges, Sotomayor, Kagan, and Brown, and Brown Jackson. All three of them have sometimes surprised, where one of them will peel off from the leftist and go with kind of the more conservative justices, the ones appointed by Republicans on particular issues. They're not obvious. You can't pigeonhole them. I think it's a mistake to treat the justices as just right-left, and therefore we know exactly how they'll vote. I think they're much more, many of them, not all of them, but many of them much more subtle than that. I think all of them care about the Constitution and separation of powers. That's the one thing I think all of them care about. The conservative justices tend to think of themselves as originalists. That is, they try to tease out the original meaning of the Constitution. I don't think they can. I don't think they have the tools to do that because they're missing the concept of individual rights. But certainly, Thomas, Alito, Gorsuch, and even Barrett, think of themselves. I don't think Kavanaugh does, and I don't think Roberts does, but think of themselves as originalists and want to tease out the original intent of the Constitution. Sotomayor, Kagan, and Brown Jackson are not originalists, obviously. They're kind of living Constitution, but they still try to interpret the Constitution based on their understanding of what they think it would mean today. Now, I don't believe in originalism, textualism, or in living Constitution. I believe in individual rights, in a proper definition of individual rights, and therefore interpreting the Constitution, interpreting the Bill of Rights in the context of an understanding of what rights mean. And it's true that that probably won't necessarily lead to every decision being the way I would like it to be, because they have to abide by the Constitution. The reality is that is the governing document of America, even if it's not perfect. To make it perfect, we'd have to go through an amendment process and we'd have to fix it, which I hope one day will be done. But it's damn good. So, so I think both originalism, which tries to take into context of it was the absurdity of making a decision about abortion based on whether in the 18th century abortion was legal or not legal, and whether the founders thought abortion was should be legal or not legal, that being the way to interpret the Constitution, rather than interpreting in the context of individual rights and whether the role of government included forcing a woman to carry a pregnancy to term, forcing a woman, whether the Bill of Rights was consistent with that. I don't think it is. I don't think that's consistent with individual rights and a proper understanding of individual rights. But, the originalists, since the Constitution doesn't say anything explicitly about abortion, kind of have to turn themselves into pretzels in order to find something in the 18th century where somebody talks about something related to abortion and make a big deal out of that. That's irrelevant. We have to, if our understanding of individual rights, if our understanding of human life, if our understanding of pregnancy has evolved since then, so does the way we interpret the Constitution have to evolve with it. Right. So Sotomayor and Kagan and Jackson are all kind of the left-wing judges, but they often rule in interesting ways. They're not completely predictable. They're not just, oh, that's a Democratic issue, they'll vote that way. And the arguments that they make are quite interesting. Gorsuch is one of the more interesting justices on the court, I think. I think this is a man who really cares about the Constitution. I think he's also a judge that really, really thinks that the government has been out of control over the last 100 years, primarily with the regulatory agencies. And, he was instrumental in ultimately overturning Chevron. He was instrumental in weakening in the last session, in weakening regulatory agencies. I think there's a lot more to be done, and I think he will lead the charge in doing that. I think he's super smart. I think on separation of powers, he's going to be good. We'll see about tariffs. I mean, that to me is going to be one of the more interesting cases in front of the courts and how these different justices rule, because on the one hand, they've got Trump and a more powerful executive, which they might favor. On the other hand, they've got separation of powers, and clearly Trump abusing some of these laws that he's trying to manipulate to justify what he wants to do. It'll be interesting to see how Gorsuch rules on the tariffs issue, or even on this Aliens Enemy Act. I have a feeling he's going to rule right not in terms of right wing, but right in terms of the way I think should be ruled. That is, I think he's going to rule for separation of powers. He's going to rule that the president is overreaching. We'll see. But he is one of the justices I really have a lot of respect for, and is thoughtful, even though often I disagree with him because he does tend to be religious. I mean, obviously in the Hobbs decision, he was on the wrong side, I think, of the court. So he's not always right, but I think he is one of the more thoughtful, considerate, and on many issues, very, very good justices out there. Kavanaugh, I don't have any sense. He seems like a complete pragmatist, rules with the wind. I think he is, he's going to be on the right. He's not therefore captured, at least, by Trump and by MAGA. So there's a good chance he rules, on the right side of the separation powers issues, on the Alien Enemies Act issues, on free speech, on executive power. We'll see. He also, I think, will rule on limiting the power of the agencies. But again, I don't know how consistent he is. He's one of the least consistent of the judges. And then finally, Amy Coney Barrett, who I was really worried about when she was nominated. She was Trump's last nominee for the Supreme Court. appointee to the Supreme Court. And I was really worried because she comes from this Catholic sect and she seemed ultra religious and a little bit of a nut. And I've been surprised at how smart she is, independent, thoughtful. Again, I don't agree with her on a lot of things. Certainly on Hobbes, I didn't agree with her, but a lot of things I don't agree with her. But, and I don't think she's a pragmatist. I think she has a view of what the law is. She has a view of what the Constitution says, a view on how to interpret the Constitution. You might not agree with, but I do not think she's just a pragmatist. I think Kavanaugh is. I think I don't know exactly what her view is. I haven't seen the integrating principle yet, but I find what she writes really interesting. Her decisions are really thoughtful. She's disagreed with some of the other justices. She had a concurring opinion on the immunity issue, which I thought was super interesting and better than the majority opinion on the immunity issue, and other opinions like that, where she has proved to be one of the more independently minded of the judges, which is a surprise given her background. I did not expect that. So I like Amy Coney Barrett. She is I think she's considered an originalist, but again, she has an independent interpretation of what that means. So yeah, I'm pretty positive about Barrett and about her ruling well, right on these cases. So in summary, let me say, I'm talking myself into the idea that this court is actually going to stand up to Trump. That this court there's a good chance, I think, for us to get what I would consider a positive ruling on the Alien Enemies Act. I don't think you can use it. Even on the tariffs, separation of power. I'm not sure about impounding, but I'm not even sure what the right position is with regard to impounding. Birthright citizenship will be interesting. I think people have a right to birthright citizenship. I think that's the right answer. I don't know what the court will rule. I think they'll rule with that, but it might be a small margin. Free speech, I don't know. It'll be interesting. Weakening the administrative state will definitely be the case. Hiring and firing, i.e. giving the executive power to hire and fire civil servants, I think the court is going to rule in favor of that. So Trump will get his way with regard to that, and I think that's probably the right decision. So it's going to be super interesting as we move through this, this docket of the court. I hope they move fast enough. I hope they're as alert as they need to be to the threat that the Trump administration poses liberty and freedom and the Constitution and the American system of government. So I hope they're on top of that ball and they are going to be diligent about protecting us from Trump's abuses of power. But overall, I think this is about as good of a court as you could expect. This is about as good of a court as you could expect, today. I think Barrett has been, I know Frank is disappointed with Barrett. I think Barrett is being exceptional. She's been definitely a breath of fresh air in compared to the other justices. I think Roberts has generally been better than I would have expected. I mean, Roberts was a massive disappointment when you go back to his ruling on the Obamacare. That was an awful ruling, a really, really, really horrible ruling. I think he's been better since. And again, I take a lot of that assessment from what our kind of legal scholar, objectivist legal scholars have said about him. They all have a generally positive opinion of Roberts' performance since the ACA. They all think that was a horrible ruling, and they have a more positive opinion of him since then. So that's where I'm. I don't think. I think this is about as good a court as we could have, given the philosophical condition of this country. I generally think the courts, our judges, are better than any other part of government. I mean, Congress now is useless, completely useless. And the presidency, you know what I think of Trump. I think by far, Congress is the most intellectual. Think about the fact that Supreme Court is the most intellectual. Think about the fact that the courts, not just the Supreme Court, but other courts, you saw this with the Wilkinson opinion, which we talked about Bud Garcia. I wanted to read you a section of that opinion. Yeah, I'm going to read you that in a second. Think about Wilkinson. They have to write these long opinions. They have to engage in intellectual reasoning. They have to present an argument. Trump doesn't. Trump tweets. Imagine if Trump had to write a 46-page argument for his decisions. That would disqualify him from being president right there. I mean, he can barely put together 3 sentences in a tweet. And Congress doesn't make any argument. It's all backroom deal making that's happening. It's all compromising. And what you get is these sausages, these horrible laws that are very difficult to interpret, that make the court's job super difficult. Congress is anti-intellectual. The only branch of the government today that is intellectual to any degree, and I think quite intellectual, is the Supreme Court, is the court system, federal court system, where they actually make arguments. They come to decisions, and you can challenge those decisions. You can appeal them. You can take them to the Supreme Court. I mean, and I'm impressed by the judges. I'm impressed by the reasoning they give. It's pretty good. Now, God, I wish it was even better. But given the very low standards we have in this country for politicians generally, our people who are in law, people who make it to become judges, are a class above everybody else. They just are. Now, these judges are, to a large extent, a consequence of the Federalist Society. I'm not sure the Federalist Society is as robust and as powerful as it is today as it was in the past. Among other things, they have had a significant falling out with Trump. But let's hope that they continue to educate, call them conservative justices, but justices that have a respect for the Constitution. And we need them more than ever. We really need them more than ever. I want to read you these 2 paragraphs from Judge Wilkinson's opinion about the Garcia case. Now, I read you other parts of that opinion on Thursday where he lamblasts the Trump administration, no holds bars. He just goes after them because and he puts the Garcia case in the right context. He says, this is not just a case about one person. You know, there's nothing. He talks about the Trump administration stashing people in El Salvadorian jails, and if we let them get away with it, there's no limit to who else they can stash away there. That we have to stand up against them. So he was excellent on this. Excellent on this. But I want to read you this about the relationship between the court and the executive branch, and again hinting significantly about the dangers of the Trump administration. So I'm quoting. This is a part of I can't remember how many page decision he put together, was it Wednesday or Thursday this week. Quote, the basic differences between the branches mandate a serious effort at mutual respect. The respect that courts must accord the executive must be reciprocated by the executive's respect for the courts. Now, I just want to note here, Wilkinson is a conservative judge, Reagan conservative, who has a history of incredible deference to the executive. That is, this is a guy lambasted the Trump administration, but from the perspective of somebody who generally sides with the president, generally thinks the executive should have a lot of leeway. This is not a, you know, we need to increase the power of Congress, we need to limit the power of the presidency guy at all. And this is why he's talking about the respect the courts have to the executive. So I'm going to read again. The respect that the courts must accord the executive must be reciprocated by the executive's respect for the courts. Too often today, this has not been the case. As call for impeachment of judges for decisions the executive disfavors and exhortations to disregard court orders sadly illustrate both things that Trump and the Republicans have been doing. I continue. Now the branches come too close to grinding irrevocably against one another in a conflict that promises to diminish both. This is a losing proposition all around. The judiciary will lose much from the constant intimations of its illegitimacy, to which by dint of custom and detachment, we can only sparingly reply. The executive will lose much from a public perception of its lawlessness and all of its attendant contagions. The executive may succeed for a time in weakening the courts, but over time, history will script the tragic gap between what was and all that might have been, and law in time will sign its epitaph. It is, as we have noted, all too possible to see in this case, this is the Garcia case, an incipient crisis, but it may present an opportunity as well. We yet cling to the hope that it is not naive to believe our good brethren in the executive branch perceive the rule of law as vital to the American ethos. This case presents the unique chance to vindicate that value and to summon the best that is within us while there is still time. Now, this guy can write. You've got to have respect for judges just for their ability to write that way. That's good writing. And it's interesting writing. It's not legalese, although some of it is hard to decipher. It's well written, it's thoughtful, it's intellectual, it's intelligent. I mean, I say, well said. Well said. I mean, a lot of people have said that this Wilkinson opinion, the whole opinion, will go down as a crucial opinion, kind of in the history of the courts. That this is monumental. You know, Abraham says beautiful prose. Yeah, it's beautiful prose. So this is why you got to still have respect for judges, and you got to still have respect for the system of law and the system in this country. They're not objectivists. They're not, you know, they don't have the same definition of individual rights as we do. But they have a respect for America, generally. They have a respect for the Constitution. They have a respect because they are the guardians of the rule of law. And really, the court system right now is the only thing standing between us and a presidency run amok with authoritarianism. And of course, if the president ignores the courts, that'll make it clear where we are. That'll make it clear what's at stake. That'll make it clear what the odds are. And you know, we'll know where we stand, and we'll know what the battle's about. It'll be about authoritarianism or not. There'll be no ambiguity about what Trump is. No ambiguity. The courts are all we can count on now, and this is why we're going to be following the courts. I'm going to be following the courts. We're going to be talking about this, and it'll be interesting to see how all this kind of shakes out. But so far, I'd say the courts are living up to my trust in them. We will see if that continues. We will see if that continues to be the case. All right. That is the show today. We'll see if I do another show. There's still some issues that Troy raised in his email that I haven't covered yet. So I might do a second show with regard to Supreme Court. Maybe the best way to do a second show with regard to Supreme Court is to invite one of our legal scholars on to talk about them, specifically what Troy asked, but also to give you more insight into all these questions. I think right now, given the importance the importance of the courts. We need more voices vis-a-vis the courts. I'll probably try to bring Larry Salzman on soon to be on here. I'm also expect to bring an economist on in the next few weeks to talk about in greater detail about tariffs and the danger of tariffs. I will remind you that on Monday I have Ankar Gate on to talk about. We'll talk about Trump. Ankar has some insightful things I think to say about Trump, but we'll also talk more broadly about philosophical issues, philosophical questions, and of course you will be able to ask anything you want, including philosophical questions. But Ankar also is a keen observer of the Supreme Court, so it will be interesting to see what his assessment of how the court is handling everything. What I would like the courts to do is speed up making decisions about things like the Alien Enemies Act. One way or another, too many lives at stake. Too many lives are hanging in the balance for them not to make that decision quickly. All right, a quick reminder to support the show by going to patreon.com, Yaron Brook Show, and making a contribution. Also, I'll remind you that you can support the show right now, for those of you watching live or watching live on Twitter. You can come over to YouTube to do this, but those of you on YouTube, there are over 160 people watching on YouTube. You can use the sticker feature, $1, $2, $5, $100, up to $500. Can't do more than $500 in support of the show. We're about $100 short of the second hour goal, which we're well into the second hour, so we really should meet the second hour goal, which is $500. And we'll probably reach into a third hour, so we're still $350 short of that one. So please consider doing a sticker. If everybody does $1.99, $2, $5, $10, something minimal, we can get to that target quite easily. Thank you, Aunt Sam, who just did a $2 sticker. Really, really appreciate that. You know, everybody hopefully would do that. Just remember, it's a way for you to show support for the show. This is a listener-supported show. What you get out of contributing is the existence of the show. Show wouldn't exist if you didn't financially make it happen. So please consider that. Trade. Value for value. Finally, I'll just do this quick. We have two sponsors, Alex Epstein, alexepstein.substack.com. Everything to do with fossil fuel, with energy, with electricity, with climate change and environmentalism. He is your guy. If you're interested in any of those topics, you have to read Alex. He is the best in the world on those topics, and insightful and quite influential in those topics within the Trump administration. So what he says is a good way to try to understand what the Trump administration is actually doing. And the other sponsor is the Ayn Rand Institute, which is providing a discount to Yaron Brook Show listeners for OCON, the Objectives Conferences that will be between July 1 and 5 in Boston, Massachusetts this year. I'll be speaking there. Lots of, you'll have some phenomenal speakers there, lots of talks, lots of time to socialize, lots of people. There'll be 500 people there who basically share your values, which is a rare occurrence. And you can get a discount if you sign up now. You can also get a discount. This discount also applies if you just want to watch the OCON lectures online, live while they happen. So you can buy a digital pass as well using this discount code. The code is 25YBS10. 25 YBS 10. Basically 25 for the year, YBS for the Yaron Brook Show, and 10 for the 10% discount you get on registration. All right, let's jump in to the Super Chat. Again, you can keep asking questions. Thank you, RDF, for another sticker. I really appreciate that. Thank you, Jonathan Honing, for a couple of stickers. And let's see who else we have. Sticker-wise, Esoteric Economy did a sticker. Catherine did a sticker. And Barbara did a sticker. Thank you, Barbara. Mary Aline did a sticker. Jonathan Honing, a third sticker. Ryan Ward. Okay, I think we've caught up with all the stickers, so thank you, guys. Please keep them coming so that we can achieve our goals. Achieving goals is one way to achieve happiness. The only way, really. All right, Rational IP asks, although I'm convinced of the principles of laissez-faire capitalism, I sometimes worry that without sufficient government funding and oversight, society might descend into chaos. Is this concern unfounded, and how do objectivists address this fear? Well, I think that the concern, or the fear as you name it, only exists because of the bombardment of statist propaganda or pseudo-history or pseudo-facts about the way markets work and the way and what has happened under the history of capitalism. I don't think the fear is rational if one really has a good understanding both of the economics of it, the history of it, and most importantly, the morality of it. I mean, the fundamental point is, if you believe, if you hold, that man's basic means of survival is reason, that all men possess the capacity to reason, then there is no alternative but freedom. And of course, if you believe that the moral purpose of life is the pursuit of your own happiness, the pursuit of your own values, then there's no alternative but capitalism. There's no alternative but laissez-faire capitalism. And indeed, it's the only system that extracts the cause of chaos from the world. That is force, coercion, an authority that imposes its will. Laissez-faire capitalism is the way we get rid of chaos. And this is, by the way, why I am not for anarchy. Anarchy is the imposition of chaos onto the world. If you understand that the agency of chaos is the agency of force and coercion, if you can subjugate that agency to the rule of morality, to the rules of justice, which is what laissez-faire capitalism does with a limited constitutional government, then there cannot be chaos. Now, you might not get everything you want to get. You might not get the exact outcome you want, right? It's not about your whims. But chaos will not exist. There will be lots of negotiating, lots of trading, lots of activity, lots of building, lots of creation. But the agent of chaos is force. The agent of chaos is violence. The agent of chaos is fraud. Those are banned. That is what you want a strong government for, to ban those. And that's what laissez-faire capitalism gives you. And then it leaves people to live freely. Freedom is not chaos. Now, again, that doesn't mean that every human being will have a positive outcome. Capitalism is a system that rewards virtue and penalizes vice. So it's quite possible that, well, not quite possible, it's a reality that people who live by vice will not live a good life under capitalism. I don't think they live a good life even without capitalism, but they will not live a good life under capitalism. But they'll also be incentivized to live a life of virtue. Now, virtue here, I don't mean just violating other people's rights. I mean virtue in the sense of being productive, being rational, being honest. People who are not productive, rational, and honest and don't abide by trade will not do well under capitalism. Capitalism is a system for the rational, for the trader. Okay. All right. So I don't think there's a rational reason to feel fear. I understand why you feel it, because you've been taught all this negative history. And you probably have, like all of us had, this real deep suspicion of the self-interest that capitalism brings to the forefront. But if you understand that self-interest is actually a virtue, not a vice, if you understand that truly self-interested people, people living by their reason, which is what capitalism demands of you, are productive, rational people, then there's nothing to be afraid of. Nothing to be afraid of. But keep asking questions in any way that I can try to relieve you of the fear. I will try to do that. All right, Andrew, I understand that this has been covered many times in objectivism and properly requires hours of exposition. But what's your $50 answer to why being egoistic is rational? My $50 answer to why being egoistic is rational. I mean, the point is that being egoistic is consistent with your nature as a living being. As a living being, life only means something, i.e., values only mean something. And therefore, morality only means something if you live. That is, life, your life, is a precondition for your existence. Your life is a precondition for any kind of moral code. And your life is not achieved automatically. So your success at living requires morality. And indeed, that's what morality is all about. It's all about guiding your life. So there's a sense in which, like, what's the alternative? Not to be egoistic, son. Not to live for yourself, which means not to live, not to pursue your own survival, not to pursue your own success at living, which means what? A little bit of death here and there sprinkled in? That's inconsistent with the idea that life is the starting point. Life is what gives everything else meaning. There is no meaning outside of life. So I need to be alive to do whatever I need to do. So why not be, what morality is going to demand of you is just to be consistent about it. Live consistently for your life. So a morality of egoism is just a recognition of, I need to be alive. That's what it means to be alive. It's to stay alive. And to stay alive as a human being is not granted to me automatically. I don't know how to do it. I need to learn. And I need some principles. I need some guidance. And an egoistic morality just gives me guidance on how to live, how to survive. Now, the only way I can do that, the only way I can live, the only way I can stay alive, really, is by being rational. Because that is my means of survival. That is the unique human means of survival, is to be rational. Now, once I'm committed to rationality for the purpose of living, well, that's egoism. Egoism just means I should be the beneficiary of my own actions. That is, I should view my life as the purpose of my actions. Well, yeah. So that is, by the way, a great question, Andrew. I don't know if that's $50 worth. Hopefully it is. But that's a great question to ask Anka. Anka will probably give you a better answer than I just did. So why don't you ask that question of Anka on Monday? And hopefully what I gave you is enough for $50, but then you can ask Anka and you can get an additional whatever value for his answer, which I'm sure will be good. All right. All right, let's see. Hopefully Andrew's okay with that answer. Brian, why do you think we don't hear from Gloria Alvarez anymore? Do you find that going on other people's shows is a waste of time? I don't know why we don't hear from Gloria. I assume she's still very active in Mexico. and has a radio show. I think she's still quite influential in South America, but some of you South Americans will correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think the fact that we don't hear from her means that she is not actively involved. Unfortunately, she came out against Milei. She has some personal dispute with Milei. So when Milei got elected, which should have been a great opportunity for her to leverage that into even more influence for herself, I think she took the wrong side of that and complained about Milei's inconsistencies and made that her focus. And I think that was a mistake. But I don't know where she is, and I don't know what's happening to her. Beyond that, is going on other people's show a waste of time? No, I mean, I don't think it is at all. Going on other people's show is the way you reach new audiences. It's the way you expand your reach. It's a great marketing tool. It's a great way to expose your own ideas, yourself, to new people, the people who follow that particular show. Apollo Zeus, thank you for the sticker. And as I said, we're going to need a bunch more of those because we have $70 still to get to our goal. So don't give up on the stickers and the questions, particularly $20, $50, $100 questions. Those are particularly valuable right now because we've got a lot of $2, $5, $10 questions. So think about whether you have a more significant question or you can't afford to ask a question for a more significant amount. Shazbot, who is crazier, Trump or General Ripper in Dr. Strangelove? I think Trump. I mean, well, I don't know. They're both pretty crazy, so I don't know. That's a tough one. I mean, General Ripper wanted to bring about a nuclear war that would end all life on planet Earth, so maybe he was crazier in the end. Maybe Trump has at least a toe in the real world, whereas General Ripper was completely gone. All right, let's see. Andrew, constitutional interpretation according to individual rights is the only rational standard. Yes. Individual rights are not dead in the court, though not strongly defended. To the extent rights are alive at all, it is in the court. Yeah, I think it's the only place they're alive. I don't think they have a particularly good or thorough or deep understanding of what individual rights indeed are. I think that's probably the weakest thing about the courts is that they don't have a deep understanding, philosophical understanding of rights. The best they have is kind of a natural rights view that goes back to the founders. But even that is rare. Even a judge like Scalia, who was very much admired by conservatives, viewed rights as nonsense on stilts. So, a lot of, there's still even in the courts, a challenge about rights. But yes, it's the only realm in which rights are even discussed, even debated. Thomas, at his best, talks about rights, and his conception of rights is okay, it's not bad, right? But that's at his best. At his worst, he is a denier and violator of individual rights. I think, again, abortion is a good example of a topic that relates to that. All right, Normative Randroid came in with $50. Can you explain the connection between force and fraud? Oh, God. Yeah, force is a direct physical act. It's a direct physical act on somebody else. It's the imposition of some kind of violence. It's the taking of somebody's property through physical action, direct physical action. So it's direct. Fraud is the imposition of force, that is the taking of somebody's values without their permission, somebody's property without their permission. But it's an indirect use of force. It's not physical. It's not me reaching into your pocket and stealing your wallet. It's me lying to you, selling you something, selling you a fake product, and thus reaching into your pocket and taking your money, right? So it's deceiving you, lying to you, and getting your value through deception or lie. It's, in a sense, a form of force, but it's indirect. It's not a direct use of violence. Hopefully that answers the question. Now, when you say force, I think if you mean it in the broader sense, then it includes fraud. But to be more accurate and to be better understood by people who don't really think these things through, it's good to say force and fraud, even though fraud is a type of force. It's just an indirect type of force versus force being direct, right? Yeah, I mean, a clear breach of contract is a form of force because it basically is extracting value from you, by underhanded means, and therefore can be force. I mean, breach of contract, fraud is also relatively more difficult often to prove vis-a-vis force. Force is clearly an action that is observable. Breach of contract can be tricky and can be open to interpretation, but yes, at its fundamental, it is a form of force. All right, we're only $20 short of our second hour goal, still $270 short of our third hour goal, and we're definitely going to the third hour given we have so many questions. All right, Ryan says, I like my coffee hot and my crisis constitutional. I like my coffee hot too. I don't like my crisis constitutional. Not a good crisis to have, not a good look to have. That Doodle Bunny says, Jim Brown's article defending Trump seems a little bizarre. Does he still work for ARI? He does not work for ARI. And he was interim CEO of ARI for a while, and he was on the board of directors of ARI, but he's neither one of those today. Michael, is the only reason Trump wants to deregulate because he's had a lot of bad personal experiences with regulators in New York? No, I don't think so. I maybe that contributes to it, but I think he thinks of himself as pro-business, and the pro-business is associated with deregulation, so he's affiliated with deregulation. I don't think he has a principled stand. He's just not getting rid of all regulation. He's getting rid of some excess, whatever. It's just kind of this is where I am. I'm pro-business. So, and notice he's pro-business, not pro-capitalism. I'm pro-business, therefore I must be anti-regulation. That's the reasoning, I think, to the extent you can call it reasoning that he goes through. Not your average algorithm. Why do people blank out? Don't contradictions bother them until resolved by logical answers they can observe for themselves in reality? No. Most people are don't care about contradictions. They're not interested in them. They don't want to follow through. They don't want to think about it. They'd rather think about something else. They'd rather stay unfocused. They'd rather drift. Ultimately, there's no answer to why they blank out. All that we can say is they do. They choose not to think. Why do they choose not to think? I don't know. They do. They make it a fundamental choice not to be engaged with reality. That's the essence of free will. Liam, I'm beginning to feel like the question, how did German people let it happen, is very much being answered before our eyes. I think that's absolutely right. I think it is being answered before our eyes on I think, a less severe scale, but we're talking about America, so therefore it's still a really, really bad scale. I think it's all over the place. How do we let the pro-Hamas demonstrators get away with what they get away with? How do they gain legal, moral legitimacy? And then on the flip side, how do we let Trump get away with it he gets away with? And let him gain moral legitimacy. So, and how do we let Trump chip away at the rule of law slowly, steadily, and slowly and steadily? So, yeah, this is what it was like in Germany, although it happened much faster then. But that's because it was Germany. Here it's going to be slower, but definitely what happens in the next few months, what happens in the next few months is going to a large extent, determine the fate of this country. Whether we head towards real authoritarianism, dictatorship, or whether we can avoid it in the short run is going to be determined in the next few months, and whether we stand up to some of Trump's abuses or not. And so far, I still think the courts will stand up to him, but we will see. Liam, how many Republicans did it take to change a light bulb? None. Trump just tells them he fixed it, and they sit there in the dark and applaud. That's pretty good. That's a good light bulb joke. That's good. I like that. All right, Hopper Campbell. Cruelty seems trendy these days, and I'm not a fan. Yes, I mean, look, I said this earlier. MAGA and Trump have done everything in their power over the last 10 years to dehumanize immigrants so that we don't care about them. And indeed, MAGA relishes in their suffering. Oh my God, they went to a high security jail in El Salvador and they'll be tortured for the rest of their life. How cool is that? And they think that. They really, really have internalized that. They really, really think that way. And that's what happens when you dehumanize. Going back to what Liam said about this is how the German people, think about how propaganda, constant, non-stopping propaganda dehumanized the Jews and then made it possible to do what the Germans did to the Jews. I mean, on a different scale, at a different level, they're doing the same thing to immigrants. And you could say it's only illegal immigrants. It doesn't matter. But there's a sense in which they're even doing it to regular immigrants. They're going after F1 visa holders. Those are legit people legally here. They're going after green card holders. They're going after people who they don't like. And they're going after people. I'll give you an example. I mean, this is shocking. Shocking because it goes against what these people claim they're for, right? So they're going after Afghan Christians who are waiting for asylum here in the United States. Because they're going to be persecuted if they go back to Afghanistan. And they're being ordered by the Trump administration to self-deport. Supposedly the deadline was yesterday. They were supposed to self-deport. Right? This is what it says. Ahmad, like other Afghans legally living in the United States, Ahmad, like some other Afghans legally living in the United States, they received a letter from the Department of Homeland Security telling him he must leave the country by Good Friday. Quote, your parole will terminate 7 days. That's all they give them, 7 days. 7 days from the date of this notice. If you do not depart the United States immediately, you will be subject to potential law enforcement actions that will result in your removal from the United States, unless you have otherwise obtained a lawful basis to remain here. You will be subject to potentially criminal persecution, civil fines and penalties, and other lawful options available to the federal government. Now, this letter was received by Afghan Christians who are here because if they go back, they will be persecuted by the Taliban. And if you think about MAGA constantly complaining about the treatment of Christians around the world, you would think that they would be rallying around Christians, Afghan Christians. But no. I mean, it's probably because his name is Ahmad, which sounds Arab, sounds Muslim, and therefore, hell with them, we're kicking them out. Or it could be that the Trump administration ICE just wants to raise their numbers, and they're looking for low-hanging fruit, and they're going for anybody. And if they can put the fear of ICE into people so that they self-deport, then they self-deport. And if they just claim to be Christians, then why do I care? Why do any of you care? Why does anybody? They don't want to go back to Afghanistan. That's a reason enough to allow them to stay, in my view. But this is the Trump administration driving either the numbers up, going after low-hanging fruit, getting self-deportations up, or just hating on everybody who's not American. And J.D. Vance told us what an American is. A real American is somebody whose ancestors worked with their hands to make this country what it is. So I guess you become more of an American the more ancestors you have, the further back in history you can go. And it's really horrible that J.D. Vance has basically diluted the Americanism of his children by marrying a woman whose parents are from India. Terrible, terrible, terrible. I mean, we should all get a rank of how American we are based on our bloodline. There it is. There's your Christian nationalism for you. There's the racist, disgusting, despicable, how far back are you a true American? And, that's, so the Trump administration has no regard, and here's the key, right? The key is America's the country of individuals. America is the country of individualism. I encourage you to read Ayn Rand's essay on Americanism in the book by, where is it? It's always behind me right there. Anyway, the book by Jonathan Hoenig, that's right there behind me on the bookshelf somewhere, on Americanism. Individualism is what makes America. And of course, all of this is an attack on individuals. It's an attack on the principle of individualism. It's treating everybody as members of groups, tribes. And it has to be stopped by the courts, to the extent that the courts have influence, by the legislature with massive immigration reform ultimately, and by us, the people, by voting these collectivistic, xenophobic bastards out of office. Textbook on Americanism. That is the title of the book. I should know I'm in the book. I've got an essay in the book. Jonathan Hoenig. Look it up. It's on Amazon. Buy a copy. You got to read it. Ayn Rand on Americanism. Rational IP. Thank you for answering my question. I think my concern about potential chaos under laissez-faire mainly stems from the irrationality we see in today's culture. Yes, and that's why we don't have laissez-faire. And you can't impose laissez-faire from above on an irrational culture. Laissez-faire will come about as the culture becomes more rational. And only when the culture becomes more rational. So, the famous line from von Mises when he was asked what was the first thing he would do when, if he was appointed dictator of the world, he could establish laissez-faire capitalism. What's the first thing he could do? And he said, resign. You cannot impose freedom on people. You can't force people to appreciate freedom. You can't impose rationality on a culture. You have to educate a culture to be rational. So you're not going to get laissez-faire capitalism out of nowhere. Now, where capitalism, a little bit of capitalism has been imposed from the top, in Chile, Argentina right now, China, where some capitalism has been imposed, in spite of the irrationality of the cultures, it did very, very well. That is, when expectations are raised, people rise to those expectations. So while you can't have complete laissez-faire capitalism just plopped onto the culture as it is, people won't know what to do with themselves, and you would have a period of real chaos while we transition. You can increase freedom quite a bit and increase it in stages so that you can, by the time you get to laissez-faire capitalism, the culture will have changed dramatically. Shazbat. I chose to be an American. What did you do beside being born? That was Ayn Rand's response to a disrespectful audience member challenging her on her immigrant status. Her immigrant status. And I can say the same thing for myself. Not that I am in Ayn Rand's not that I'm Ayn Rand or in her league, but I can say I chose to be an American. What did all these so-called, xenophobic nationalist Americans, what did they do to become Americans? They just accident of birth. That's what J.D. Vance has going for him. Not choice, not a decision. James, if the Supreme Court holds Trump in contempt of court, what enforcement mechanism do they even have? Can they file a warrant for his arrest? No, I mean, that has to be the Justice Department. Now, arguably, they could hire a private lawyer to file charges against the president. But at the end of the day, if the Justice Department doesn't follow through, there's nothing they can do. That's why it's called a constitutional crisis. It's a dead end. There's nowhere to go. There's nowhere to go. James, if tariffs are deemed unconstitutional and Trump doesn't remove them, can businesses choose to side with the court over Trump? Well, I don't know what that means, right? I don't know what that means. Not pay their taxes? Because it's businesses that have to pay the import duties, the tariffs. They can ignore it, and then what? Trump could then take them to courts, but the court sided with them. So it's chaos. It's chaos. If the courts rule tariff unconstitutional and Trump insists on charging them and insists on sending his agents out to collect them, you have chaos. You have a disaster in this country. Abraham Campus watched a Jeffrey Sachs interview on Israel, China, and Ukraine. Felt like alternative history. What's your take on him? I mean, he's a lying, immoral, evading, statist, leftist scumbag. But other than that, he's great. I mean, Jeffrey Sachs is the guy who in the 1990s, the Russians, Boris Yeltsin, nobody talks about this. Boris Yeltsin, but I have several times on the show. Boris Yeltsin invited to Russia to help them move towards capitalism, move away from communism towards capitalism. It was on Jeffrey Sachs's advice that they privatized the way that they did. It was Jeffrey Epstein, Jeffrey Sachs, not Jeffrey Epstein, Jeffrey Sachs's direct influence that brought about the oligarch system in Russia. And it ultimately led to the rise of Vladimir Putin. So, to a large extent, Jeffrey Sachs is responsible for the horrible state of Russian economy and Russian culture over the last 40 years, 30 years. So, nobody talks about this, but Jeffrey Sachs was right there. He was invited by the Russian administration to come and help them privatize. And he gave them all the bad, worst advice possible. And that advice led to the concentration of all these assets in the hands of oligarchs and the creation of the kind of fascist system that exists in Russia today. So he has no credibility to speak on any of these issues. And he's really, really, really bad. He's a real villain. He's a real villain. And he's been elevated since the war with Ukraine. He's become an expert. Everybody talks to him because he's at some fancy university. Clark, Trump is on a making people uncomfortable spree. He's lighting fires everywhere. European leaders can't negotiate because they have no idea what the Americans want. Yes, I've heard that. Everybody's trying to negotiate with America about tariffs. And they all come out of negotiations saying, we don't know what the Americans want. There's no negotiation going on here because we don't actually know what they want. They don't know what they want. Yes, I mean, Trump wants to piss off all the people he doesn't like. All the people that he believes were unjust to him. All the people that that said that he lost the 2020 election. all the people that voted against him in various situations, the Europeans who make fun of him constantly, television networks that make fun of him constantly. He just is on a spree of hatred. Anybody who disrespected Trump is history. And everybody who's loyal to Trump and has stayed consistently loyal to him, he rewards. It's all that matters to him. He is the ultimate in narcissism. Clark, do you think Trump will stabilize on a 10% tariff for everybody? I don't know. I don't think Trump knows. I don't think anybody knows. I think he might. But what about China? Do you think he's going to lower tariffs to China to 10%? What about automobiles that are 25% and steel that are 25% and the upcoming microprocessor tariffs? So no, it's not going to be standard 10%. We might not get the so-called stupid reciprocal tariffs. Those might go away. But you'll get lots of other tariffs because Trump will go after particular industries, particular things. And as long as he's got Navarro whispering in his ear, and as long as he gives respect to Navarro, we'll get all kinds of different things. And it'll be very unpredictable. Trump, to some extent, enjoys the chaos. He doesn't enjoy being unloved. He doesn't enjoy that the market is going down. But there's something in him that also enjoys the chaos and enjoys the idea that some of the people losing their money are people he doesn't like. Clark says, I don't think Trump thinks ahead about anything. Everything is the moment for him. Yes. He's a thug. He's a bully. He's a materialistic bully thug who doesn't think conceptually. To think long term, you have to think conceptually. Michael, will we regain the world's trust will we not regain the world's trust until Trump himself is distant memory? Hard to tell how this will all play out. There's so much still to happen. We're only in the first few months. But yes, we're losing the world's trust, whatever that means, the governments of the world's trust and the peoples of the world's trust. I mean, it's going to be a while before, I think, tourism, comes back. You should see the numbers for Tesla sales in Northern Europe. They're plummeting by 50% in places like Germany, Denmark, Sweden, Netherlands, by 50%. And I think you'll see other American goods decline in popularity. People will try not to buy American because they so resent America because of Trump. And a lot of cities that rely on tourism are going to take a real beating this summer. Enric, what can become critical is how the police and military act if the Trump administration clearly acts against the court ruling. I don't think they'll do anything. I mean, look, the only federal police we have really is the FBI. That's controlled by Trump accolades. That's controlled by people who will do anything for Trump. Even if he declares a dictatorship, they will support it. That's, what's his name? Patel, right? And then the military, they replaced the leadership of the military partially for this. They replaced the leadership of the military with people who are loyal to Trump, not the Constitution, but to Trump. Now, maybe they miscalculated, and maybe some of the military leaders they appointed still care about the Constitution and will reject Trump, but I wouldn't count on it. This is why Trump's Congress approving his appointees to the Justice Department and to the FBI, and then what he did with the military, which doesn't need congressional approval, but it's just so horrific. Kash Patel, that's right. It's just so horrific and so dangerous because it again sets us up for an authoritarian push by him. Who is going to push back? What is the mechanism by which we push back? Andrew, Vance, you don't achieve self-esteem through your ancestors. Reminds me of Rand's critique. After Roots, that people were running to fortune tellers to know that their great-great-grandmother, to glean some mystical sense of pride. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the fact that Vance needs to justify his argument by reference to his ancestors shows how little he thinks of himself. and his position and his status. But that's the shift we've seen. Vance has gone from being somebody who believes in individualism and being an atheist even, to being a religious nationalist who believes the morality and virtue is tied to blood and soil. Blood and soil. And he said explicitly in a speech not that long ago, I think even in front of the Republican National Convention, he said, America is not an idea. It's not about individualism. It's as if he's arguing with Ayn Rand. It's not about individualism. It's not about rights. It's not about the particular system of government we have, or freedom, or don't tread on me. It's about none of those things. America is about a particular place and a particular people. It's about blood and soil. And that's Vance. That is Vance. I've said for a long, long, long time now, he is unbelievably dangerous because he believes this stuff. All right, Michael, if there is a real constitutional crisis, I think justice demands the objectivist movement manifest itself in a physical space, even if we only get 1,000 people. It would help build exposure and network of trust, being part of the first waves of pushback against tyranny. Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with you. We need to do something. We'll see what we actually do. You should ask Onkar what he thinks about that when Onkar's on. We have organized objectivist demonstrations in the past. Elia Gonzalez's return to Cuba, and we've done stuff on other stuff, and I can't remember what else we've demonstrated on, but there have been other objectivist demonstrations. Andrew, I heard a conservative say we must respect El Salvador's sovereignty. Really? I don't know how she said it with a straight face. They will say anything. Yeah, I mean, remember, El Salvador's only holding these people because we pay them to do so. It's at our request. All we have to do is ask them to return, or even say we won't pay you, and it'll be back like that. Back like that. It's just the demonstrations are not that effective. That was the lesson we learned from the demonstrations we did. I mean, I spoke at a demonstration in what do you call that square in San Francisco? Union Square in San Francisco on Elia Gonzalez in 1999. And we did other stuff afterwards, and we came to the conclusion it's a lot of time and effort to organize, and it just doesn't actually get you much of anything. It doesn't get you much exposure. That was the conclusion we came to. Maybe we need to change that conclusion, but that was the conclusion I came to 20 years ago. Michael, a movement that only remains online and never enters physical space is a movement that don't achieve that next level. I'm not sure that's true. I'm not sure that's true. I think most of the movements, MAGA is primarily an online movement. I think the environmentalist movement was, I mean, it manifested itself physically, but not everything else was physical. It's not about backing a particular demonstration. It's about whether you go and demonstrate. It's not about backing other people's demonstrations. I'm not sure that's true in a world in which online is where ideas are being conveyed. I'd argue the whole new right has grown and become real as a consequence of online. And the reality is that objectivism has physical space, right? That's what OCON is for, and you should come to OCON, Michael. I mean, that's what we get together for once a year at least, and then we have Ayn Rand conferences all over different places around the world and in the United States, and that's where we should be. Michael says the alt-right manifested itself in Charlottesville and now they control the government. Well, not quite, but if we went out and we marched with the numbers that Charlottesville had, we would not control the government 3 years later. It's not the alt-right went out to Charlottesville that made them control the government. It's the fact that in the White House, when they did Charlottesville, they found a sympathetic voice. We would not find a sympathetic voice in the White House. We would indeed be protesting against the White House. So they were already on the ascent because the White House was already sympathetic to them. In spite of everybody denies what Trump said about Charlottesville. Ryan, do you think the Democrats are just waiting in the wing for the Constitution to self-destruct under Trump so that in the next cycle they can leverage this disaster to really fix America? No. I don't think that's smart. I don't think they're that scheming. I don't think the world works that way. I don't think they think that far in advance. It's not like I think to a large extent Trump has managed to shock them. I'm not even sure that they shock. They're in shock. They've been overwhelmed by just how many crazy things Trump has done. And they're struggling to mount a defense because what are they going to defend? The Constitution? Well, they don't believe in that. I think they would like to stop Trump if they could. I don't think it's like, oh, yeah, let's get Trump, get all this power, and then we'll use it when we get in. I don't think they think that way because they're afraid that if he gets that power, they will never get in. And they should be afraid. Marilyn, I was told that only citizens deserve justice. Do these fools even read the Constitution? Residents are entitled to due process and equal protection under the law. Citizens are next. Yes, all residents, including citizens. And the reality is that all men are created equal. That's in the Declaration of Independence. All men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with inalienable rights. All men. Not just citizens, not just some men, not just white men, not just the ones you like, all men, including illegal immigrants. Illegal immigrants have individual rights, inalienable rights. You can't take them away. Life, liberty, property, and the pursuit of happiness. Every single illegal immigrant has it. And every single illegal immigrant in the United States has the protection of the rule of law. Every single one. Due process. And the Supreme Court has ruled 9-0 that that is the case. So that even the Supreme Court, with its limited understanding, gets that even so-called illegal immigrants have due process rights. Indeed, I think they have a lot more rights. They have every right. They have the right to immigrate. It's the idea of making them illegal, which is the violation of rights. It's the laws that define illegal immigrants, which are rights violating. Individual rights means you have the right to move. It doesn't say you have individual rights as long as you're in that piece of property. As long as you don't violate other people's rights. Immigrating to the United States violates nobody's rights. I'll say that again. Immigrating, even illegally, to the United States violates in and of itself nobody's rights. It is a victimless crime. It is exactly the kind of crime that we should be advocating for doing away with. All right. Harper, is there a chance Trump will start a nuclear war if he feels disrespected enough? Is this how humanity goes extinct? No, I don't think so. I don't think Trump wants to die. I don't think so. Let's not exaggerate the risks that he poses. He's not going to press a button to start a war. He might do enough stupid things to drag us into a war, but I don't think he would consciously start a war. Ian, did you see the Trump administration letter to Harvard was sent in mistake before they meant to? Is this the most incompetent administration in U.S. history? It's unbelievably incompetent. I mean, the Secretary of Defense just had 4 of his people right under him, like his chief of staff, the vice chief of staff, and 2 others, kicked out of the building and fired. And people are saying the Department of Defense is in meltdown. Yeah, the letter was sent in mistake, supposedly. I'll talk about that Monday or tomorrow or something. I just didn't want to talk about it today because we were going to talk just about the court. Bonnie, the work Yaron does is phenomenal, worth much dollars. Thank you, Bonnie. Really appreciate that. It is worth much dollars. It's also worth a lot more subscribers than I have. A lot more. A lot more. It's a statement on the culture, I think, if I can say so myself, that I have as few subscribers as I do. It's sad. Which means that if you're not a subscriber, please subscribe. Don't forget to subscribe. Who would you appoint to the Supreme Court today? Larry Salzman, Steve Simpson, Adam Ossoff. 25, 30 years ago, I would have appointed Leonard Peikoff. Tara Smith would make a great Supreme Court judge. Tara Smith. That's who I'd appoint, right? I'd appoint objectivists with deep knowledge of the Constitution and deep knowledge of objectivism, of philosophy. Yeah, Ilya Shapiro might be pretty good. Yeah, I don't think I agree with everything with Ilya, but on key things we agree. But Tara Smith would be great. Onkar would be fantastic. Imagine Onkar Ghate as a Supreme Court judge. Couldn't think of anybody more thoughtful, real thinking, right? So I think I mentioned Adam Ossoff. Yeah, so any one of our legal scholars, but even ones, because they integrate understanding of the law with the philosophy of objectivism. Abraham, what angle would they have on birthright citizenship? The Constitution is clear. SCOTUS enforces, not amends. There is an interpretation, which I don't understand, that that's not what the Constitution says, that we are misinterpreting it. Let's wait and see what they say. Ryan, I don't know about demonstrations, but it is probably time for a full-page ad in the New York Times. I will ask Onkar about it. Sounds good. Sounds good. It costs a lot of money. So that means spending, I don't know, $200,000 on a piece in a full-page ad somewhere. That's a big ask. That's a big ask. Jonathan, number one, why don't you wash your fruit? Number two, did you talk about when you met Nathaniel Brandon? Number three, thank you for all you do for Reason and Ayn Rand. Why don't I wash my fruit? Because I'm lazy. And I assume it's been washed before it reaches me, I think. I think we do wash our fruit, so I don't know. I wouldn't stand by I don't wash my fruit. Some fruit I wash. What did you talk about when you met Nathaniel Brandon? He wanted to get together for coffee. I said I wouldn't. He accused me of being afraid of Leonard Peikoff, and that's why I wouldn't have lunch with him. And I said, no, that's not why I won't have lunch with you. I just don't want to have lunch with you. It has nothing to do with Leonard Peikoff. That was basically our conversation. Number three, thank you for all you do for Reason and AOI and Ayn Rand. Thank you, Jonathan. I appreciate all your support. Moral and financial. Oh, God, we still have a lot of questions. Okay, let's do this quickly because I've got to go to dinner. Jacob, how do you square Judge Roberts rewriting ACA to get through the court and Roberts wanting a separation of power legitimacy of the courts? I think he screwed up royally. I think you can't square it. I think, I don't know if we had to go back, he would change that ruling. I don't know. I also think that at the time he thought that ACA was incredibly popular in the American people, that he didn't want the court to be the one determining the future of healthcare in America. I think he was mistaken. I think it was ridiculous. I think it was stupid. I think it was a really, really bad decision. But I think he's better than that, and he's proved to be better than that later on. You can write somebody off because of one decision, but the objective things to do is just to follow them and see. And some decisions he makes I completely disagree with, and that one is the worst of all of them, I think. I mean, Dobbs is another one, the one that undid Roe versus Wade. But he's got a few decisions that are just despicable and awful. But he's also got good decisions and a good steering of the court in a decent direction. Matthew, Trump's ability to deliver a coherent sentence is almost comical. Do you believe Trump is really a moron or that this is intentional? Is he deliberately speaking dumb to appeal to his base? No, I just don't think he's very smart. I think he's also a kid from, what is it, the Bronx, or a part of, I can't remember the part of New York. He grew up as in a rough environment. The real estate business is a rough business. I don't think he's a moron, i.e. 70 IQ or whatever a moron is. I just don't think he's super smart. And I think he is, more importantly, an evasive, delusional, emotionally manipulative person. He manipulates people. His whole focus is to manipulate. And I think the way he speaks is reflective of all of that. He grew up in Queens, not Bronx, Queens, that's right. I think he is... I don't think at this point in his life he can put together a coherent, intelligent, sophisticated sentence. I just don't. Not because he doesn't have that cue to do it, but because I don't think he has the mental capabilities to do it. He doesn't have the... I don't think he's practiced it in a long, long time. Oh, you should watch The Apprentice, guys. Watch The Apprentice. I mean, he doesn't need to be articulate. Bullies don't need that. And more than anything, he's a bully. He's a bully that places his wish, his emotion, before anything else. He's a primacy of consciousness whim worshiper. It makes him operationally a moron. Why do you think Trump's personal hubris will allow him to see to the court, isn't he only about beating the other in a zero-sum paradigm? Yeah, but I think that he also wants to be viewed as an American president. He also wants to be viewed as successful. He wants to achieve stuff it's not achievable, and what he wants to achieve is not good. I think he wants to be viewed as legitimate. He doesn't want to be viewed as illegitimate. I don't think even though he wants to be a dictator, I don't think he wants to be viewed as a dictator. I think he's got a complex personality, and the people around him, when he talks to Navarro, he wants to raise tariffs on everybody. When he talks to Bassett can talk sense into him. And I think that there are people around him who can still talk sense into him. I think there are plenty of people in this administration who do not want the whole administration to be questioned in terms of its legitimacy because of a constitutional crisis. But I might be wrong. I might be way too optimistic. Stephen, hi, Yaron. What's the best way to make friends after college? Where do you recommend people go to meet other people? Well, I mean, one of the reasons to go into the office at work and not to just work at home is to work is a great place to make friends. I think objectivist meetups, objectivist conferences are great places to meet objectivist friends. I think engaging in other kind of activities, whether, I don't know, if you like dancing, going dancing, if you like to play bridge, go play bridge, or if you like to pick up a hobby that involves other people and get into social situations where you can meet them. But work is the primary, and objectivism is another way, and hobbies is a way to do that. So I think those are the places. Stephen, hi, Yaron. What do you think of College Bowl, bar trivia, Jeopardy, and the like? Does training the trivia events disintegrate your mind? No, for trivia events. I don't think it disintegrates the mind. I don't think it's necessarily super important for the mind, but it doesn't disintegrate it. It can be fun. It can be fun to do. It's pretty amazing when somebody knows all of these things, but I don't particularly like it, and my mind is not particularly geared towards trivia. I can't remember stuff, as you can probably tell from the show. But I don't think I definitely don't think it disintegrates. And indeed, the reality is that if you have a well-functioning mind and if you're an integrator, the more facts you can stuff in there, the more they get integrated with other things, the more it helps you ultimately in life. Stephen, is there a way to attend church without giving yourself over to faith? Can one try to secularize its teaching and still be rational in life? I think it's hard. I mean, you're basically making a statement by going to church. You're also indulging it. You're also devoting a significant amount of your time to it. Your time is the most precious thing you have. So No, I don't think there's any rational reason to go to church. Any value to be gained by going to church. Ryan, NBA playoffs just started. Are you avoiding talking about the Celtics? Who is winning this year? Thanks, Yaron. I think the Celtics will win it all. I'm not avoiding talking about the Celtics. I just haven't thought of it. First game is tomorrow. I know that. I'll try to watch it if I have time. I'm just so busy. But generally, still a Celtics fan. Still want them to win. Still hope they win. And I am watching on Cinemax. There's a really, really interesting documentary about the history of the Celtics. So I'm watching that and enjoying it. So, yeah. Andrew, regarding Ben Shapiro's example of selfishness as leaving a beloved wife or a hot woman at the bar, that's whim-ridden short-term thinking and much more, and pretty much opposite of what objectivism means by selfishness. Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better. Matthew, it's worth noting that most force is not actual physical force, but the threat of force. Therefore, a type of coercion. Fraud is also a type of coercion. Yeah, I think that's right. But implied in the threat of force is physical force. Again, fraud is indirect physical force. But yes, most of it is coercion. That is the threat of using physical force on you. Taxes, for example. Tom, anarchy exists in a gray zone off the coast of Maine between the United States and Canada, where violence has reigned. Liberty doesn't exist in an ethical vacuum. I didn't know that there was such a place between the United States and Canada. That's interesting. But yeah, all you have to do is look at Somalia. That's a great example of anarchy. Ben Shapiro is back. This is Michael. Ben Shapiro is back to criticizing Trump over tariffs again. He goes back and forth about kissing his ring to pushing back against blatant insanity. Yeah, but what is Ben Shapiro's stand on due process for illegal immigrants? What is Ben Shapiro's stand on Garcia? What is Ben Shapiro's stand on sending illegal immigrants to a jail in El Salvador using the American Enemies Act or the Alien Enemies Act? What's his stand on sending American citizens who are criminals to a jail in El Salvador? I think that is the real test. That is the real test. Are you still for liberty or not? Michael, what's the difference between J.D. Vance's comments about his ancestors built this country and the Nazi slogan of blood and soil? There's a difference in, the implication. That is, the Nazis were serious. And they were going to be violent about it. They really thought through that. And I think J.D. Vance, using it as a, shallow nationalistic slogan, he's not quite yet ready to raise it as a banner and to go kill people for it. That's the difference. How seriously they take it. Michael, even Paul Krugman is giving more decent talks on free trade. Will the Democrats orient themselves to a more market-friendly party to combat Trump? Hard to believe, given their nihilistic core. Paul Krugman has always been for free trade, or mostly always, except when a Democratic president did something against it. But Paul Krugman got his Nobel Prize for an article on free trade. Krugman has always been pro, and almost all economists, including leftist economists, are pro-free trade. I think there is a chance that at least a portion of the Democratic Party become more market-friendly. There is a portion of the center left that is market-friendly. They've got a bunch of economists that are quite good, on some issues at least. The challenge is, can they shrug off? Can they eliminate the far left, which is at the moral heart of the party? Can they get rid of Elizabeth Warren and AOC on economics? And I don't know if they can. Look, even Bernie Sanders right now is pro-free trade because he's anti-Trump. I'll show you a graph next week of Democrats' approach to free trade and how tribal it is. Paul, do you think Trump will sell out Israel? Will he bomb Iran if no deal is reached? I do not believe Trump will bomb Iran. I do believe Trump will sell out Israel. How bad the sellout will be, I don't know. It might not be super bad, but he's not going to be full-on great supporter of Israel. It's not in his character. There's no reason to believe that, and I do not believe he will bomb Iran. I think they're plenty of people like J.D. Vance and his administration that are just against anything like that. Neo, is the saying diversity is a strength correct? It depends what they mean by diversity, but diversity can be a strength in some contexts. It's not a strength in other contexts. A diversity of what? Diversity of intellectual ability, diversity of viewpoints, diversity of skin color, diversity of ethnic backgrounds, diversity of what? So diversity is a strength is just an empty bromide. Empty bromide. So diversity as a strength is just silly outside any context. It's not that it's completely untrue. I mean, but it's not that it's completely. It's certainly not true. But I can imagine you could devise a particular narrow context in which it is. Ask ChatGPT to make you a question. Yaron, what do you think is the most underrated virtue in objectivism that people often overlook in practice? Pride, probably. Pride. That is the real ambition to be morally perfect, the real ambition to take morality seriously, to be a moral crusader in your own life, in your own life. I think the others are much more straightforward, but the idea of being morally perfect seems, I think, intimidates people. And I think taking your morality seriously and going all out and not compromising is very, very difficult for people. And that's what pride demands of you. It demands of you. So I think it's pride. Yeah. I think a lot of objectives have integrity and honesty. I think that's all there. And rationality, or at least they try. You know, if I thought about it longer, maybe I'd come up with a different answer, but that seems to be my best. All right, guys, thank you. Really, really appreciate the support. We almost made the 3-hour target, but we did well overall, so I appreciate all the super chatters. If you'd like to support the show monthly, which I really, really, really appreciate, Patreon, patreon.com, and just put Yaron Brook Show and become a monthly supporter. You could also use PayPal. PayPal is still bigger than Patreon. And particularly if there's anybody out there who can afford and values the shows enough to do $100, $250, or $500 a month, I would really, really, really appreciate that. Those are kind of little game changers for the show, so please consider that. But other than that, I don't know about tomorrow, maybe a show tomorrow, but certainly Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday next week, we're on for shows. So see you then. Bye, everybody.